This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Meeting today is for those of home which you are joining us from, so Sophie is part of the Mindful Centre, and she's a child clinical psychologist, and she's also director of Prof, the families, parent and families research alliance. Read that right? One of the directors is very, really exciting work, advocacy work, people change. But today Sophie's going to be talking about tuning into kids, which is a program that she gets. And we are actually working together in a project using that to expresses, which has been really exciting.
Thank you, Claire. And hopefully everyone can see me as well. It's very quiet. Thank you, Cindy. Hopefully you can hear me better than you can Sarah. Just give me a heads up if there's any problems there. Sorry to get up my nose distance as well. Hello, everybody. Lovely to be here in person. It's very exciting to tell you about our Tuning Into Kids program. I'm going to do a few things today in 45 minutes to try and give you a bit of an overview of our program, giving you a bit of an idea of where it comes from in terms of theory, sort of development a little bit. I'll talk to you a little about what is in the program, so it gives you a bit of an idea of that. And then I'm going to talk a bit about an overarching look at some of our research, and then specifically some of our recent research that we've been doing in Mindful and the team, looking at different ways of delivering the program. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about how you take the program out, how you disseminate it. So that's going to be a bit of my focus today. So first off, we also want to acknowledge co-authors on the program, Anne Harley, who Anne and I started working together back in 1999. We've been working on developing this program and collecting evidence and disseminating this program now for 23 years. So that's a sustained focus one block of work. So this will give you some idea of what this means as I go through some of the things that we've done in that time. So just acknowledging Anne and I beginning, and also Christiana Pico, who's come on as one of the authors of the different variations of the program, including the teens program, the toddlers program. She's working on the whole school of college as well. You guys hear me okay for that? My being strong enough. And also just acknowledging that we have a whole team of people in terms of research, but also in terms of training and dissemination. That's what we do at Mindful. We both conduct the research and then disseminate the program to get it out to those working with children, young people, families, carers. Just acknowledging the people there and acknowledging support from Mindful, Sandra Benavini, our director. So I just want to start by giving you a picture of that. When it comes to parenting, one size does not fit all. We need a range of ways of raising our children. And for this reason, when I started this work back in the 1990s, when I was training as a clinical psychologist, most of the parent work was behavioural approaches in terms of using time out, using parent ignoring, using positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. And that works for many families, but it doesn't work for everyone. And we do need a range of other approaches. So when I came over here to start looking at this for my PhD back in the late 90s, I met Anne Harley, who is a parent educator. So I'd already come in as a clinical psychologist, she's come in as a parent educator, and together we had this very fabulous idea that we needed to take some of the emerging research that finds that the way parents and carers respond to children's emotions, the way they talk, the way they connect, the way they engage, have a really important role in teaching children the skills of what we call emotional competence, how we understand our emotions, how we regulate our emotions. And that parents have a really important role in shaping those skills. And therefore, we should really be looking at how can we help parents to learn and do that in a way that really enhances those skills for children in order to promote their optimal growth and development, to prevent problems, or even to treat problems if they're emerging. Because as we know, many kids have problems with fears and worries, or anger, or sadness, or being overwhelmed, or too suppressed, or unable to manage emotions in relationships, in their social relationships. And these are really essential skills that also help them to listen and learn. They need to develop these skills early. So Anne and I thought, let's take some of this emerging theory and put it into practice. So this is what we've spent some time doing. So the Tuning into Kids program is an, an evidence-based program for parents and carers and teachers as well. And it helps to build close supportive relationships between the adult and the child or young person. And in order to promote the child's development and prevent problems. And we have spent, as I said, over 20 years collecting evidence about this, because what we found is when we began, we were told this was too touchy-feely, it won't really have an impact on children, their development. So Anne and I have just been very fierce at ensuring we could get the evidence to find out what we knew was actually what was really important was that the way we connect with our children around emotions actually has a very important role in their development, and it prevents problems, and it also can be used to treat problems. So we have spent a lot of time collecting that evidence to actually be able to stand there and go, this works, because that evidence is really crucial in play. In sum, we focus on emotional competence in children in order to improve children's functioning, knowing that kids vary. Like you all know that some kids are much more intense in their emotions, some are more reserved, it's very hard for them to come out of their shell, they're more quiet and reserved around new people. Others have lots of intense emotions and they have trouble managing anger, irritability, frustration. Others, it's like they're overwhelmed by sadness and distress. So kids vary right from the beginning, and they're what we call temperament that really impacts their emotional competence. But we also know that the way that parents and carers talk, respond when children are emotional, teaches kids these skills. And this occurs very much within a context of, it depends on your culture, how people talk and respond to emotions. So cultures vary widely in their acceptance of anger. That comes through to parents, which then affects their parenting. So we know that the social and cultural context also has an important role. So we've taken this theory and we've looked at what is it about parenting, and we know that in particular, that it depends on how parents actually respond when a child is emotional, when they are angry or sad. That teaches the child this emotion's okay, this emotion's not okay. And that teaches the child to either listen and learn about that emotion, or to suppress it, or to be overwhelmed by it and not be able to manage it. And the work by Gottman and colleagues, when we first came across it, was fantastic, because it really showed parents varied, and even though if they were warm, caring, loving, they might be very dismissive of emotions of their child. So it's not just being a loving parent or a good parent, it's actually, do they also respond and move toward the child's emotions? And they found there was a very different outcome. If you were more dismissive, children had poorer emotional competence. If you were more what they call emotional coaching, which is where they notice emotions in a child, they come closer, come in with the child, down to the child's level, give the child space, empathize, that's really hard, thinking it's sad right now, and then be with the child so the child's emotion settles. So that attachment function is here. It helps the child to calm. When the child is calmer, then they can say what would help right now. So the problem solving or the setting limits comes last, but only when the emotions have been responded to. And that emotional coaching style of parenting has been found to be important in predicting emotional competence in children. So we've taken that and gone, let's really work with that concept in building up an intervention here. And also building more connected relationships between parents and children. Because when your parent or carer hears you, responds to your emotions, you feel okay inside. It validates your experience. That builds on that sense of I'm an okay person and develops that self-concept. So, and the research evidence is overwhelmingly now finding that when children have emotional coaching in their parents, if their parents or carers, it promotes a whole range of different outcomes. Not just emotional outcomes, but social outcomes as well. And it leads to fewer problems with internalizing, externalizing problems, illnesses, well-being, physical well-being, as well as mental health outcomes. And in particular, if you've got a kid who's much more emotional, more reactive, or more intense with anxiety or fearfulness or sadness, those kids benefit even more by having this kind of parenting. So it's, you know, like some kids will do sort of okay, but with whatever sort of parenting, some kids really need this kind of parenting when they are much more emotional kids. And usually in a family, you always have at least one kid who's much more emotional in one way or another. That's part of the genetic kind of setup, that you've got to have different sort of children to ensure your genes continue. So we do have some kids in the family who will be more calm, and some who may be much more reactive. And that's why, you know, you often need different parenting, different children in the family as well. So we set this program up initially as a group program, and we set it up for parents or carers to come along each week, 2 hours a week, over 6 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever. We set it as a manualized delivery, and that they could come and learn about these skills with other parents. We've developed that into also applying it in more one-to-one delivery and more therapeutic delivery, or online as well. And the whole idea is that people learn about these concepts, especially around emotion coaching. And they also learn, because one of the critical things is it depends a lot for a parent on how emotional they are, how reactive they are. So a huge part of our work is about building parents' emotion regulation skills for themselves as well. And as you know, those of you who have kids, when you get angry with your child, if you can manage that, it makes a huge difference to be able to kind of just calm yourself or stop for a moment, step out of the room for a break, come back later. Then if you actually go right into it at the time, it often leads to more of an escalation. So we really work with what we call parents measure emotion philosophy, how people think and feel about emotions, which is really key. And that helps them then build emotional coaching skills to use with their children, and that has really beneficial outcomes for children. So I'm not going to say too much about it, but this is our tuning into kids model, and blue is what contributes to these yellow boxes. These are our main target areas for our intervention. Parents and their emotion philosophy, how they think and feel about emotions, their own awareness and regulation, and their emotion coaching skills. And in particular, we teach these 5 steps of emotion coaching. So they are, when you see your child's emotional, you actually notice that, you look at facial expression, you see what's going on, and you think, what else could be going on behind that? You connect, literally you stop, you might come in, you might be at the child's level, you slow down, and you see that as a time to actually connect and guide your child. And then you also see there's a time that's the way you respond would be especially in showing empathy. It's really hard, isn't it, when you're having such a time? Gosh, that looks really frustrating. You might also name the emotions. So empathy and naming emotions are really critical. And then you also might use this last step of emotion coaching, which is that you help a child to problem solve. And all wishes and feelings are okay, but not all behaviours. We contrast this throughout the program with helping people to recognise the difference between emotion coaching and then emotion dismissing. When you might be warm and loving, but you might be saying, cheer up, you'll be right, don't worry, there's nothing wrong here. Do you try and distract your child or push them past the emotion or try and solve their problems? And that does not teach a child to understand and learn to work through their own emotional experiences. Now, emotion coaching doesn't happen all the time. You can't. There's too much going on in life to always be responding to emotions. But if you do this some of the time, Botman and colleagues found about 30 to 40% of the time was enough to really promote good emotional competence. So we do this contrast where we look at dismissiveness, and that is what the messages a child receives then are, on what I'm feeling, angry. If you're ignoring me, or you're putting me in my room for that, it tells me that feeling is not right. So the messages are suppress it, get rid of it, avoid it. I'm not worthy of connection when I feel anger. And the child doesn't learn to listen and regulate, manage their own feelings and learn to use that in relationships when other people are angry or they're angry with another person as they get older. So these are really important things. And instead it might lead to other negative feelings like shame, guilt, or anger. And emotion coaching, on the other hand, gives the child the message that when we feel feelings, it's useful to recognize them in ourselves and we listen to that and we use it to guide us to judge what's going on in a situation, what I need. I need a cuddle right now. I need to be protected by my parent right now. I need to take a break from this right now. I need to breathe slowly right now. So we're guided by our learning if we've learned to attend to that. And when parents emotional coach, children are more likely to learn those skills and that helps their emotional confidence. They will also learn not to be scared of emotions. Feelings will pass. All emotion passes. So that's really important. And, like a train going through a tunnel, it'll always come out the other end. Emotions will always come down the other side. And for parents, we're teaching it's about often being with your child until the emotion passes, often without saying anything at all. And that connection, acceptance of how they're feeling, not necessarily their behaviour, but their feeling, still have limits around behaviour, allows a child to go, oh, yeah, okay. You still love me, I'm okay, these feelings are right, it's normal. And they start learning to pay attention to it more, and then they're more receptive to learn to regulate emotions as well. So we do teach that parents that you have on the surface and then you have what's underneath. A child that comes home that's really irritable with you about what food you've just given them, it might not be that they're irritable with you about the food. They're actually feeling really ashamed of something that happened at school that day. What comes out is irritability. If you only focus on that surface, you miss the deeper things that are usually driving strong emotions. So we really teach parents to step back and slow down. And when everyone's maybe a little calm, saying, something's up in school, I think. Then the child might be more ready to actually connect with them to talk about being told off in front of the class and feeling really ashamed of what they did. All right, I'm just going to move past this, but what we do know is that one of the biggest things that parents struggle with is that they need help and skills in learning to empathise with their child. That's a really key part of the work that we do. And so much, you think about your own relationships. When a good friend hears you, connects with you, validates your feelings, says, God, yeah, that is awful. That sense of being validated for your emotions and them sharing, yes, that's really hard, is often all you need in a relationship, isn't it? It's often all you need to help calm you with your friend or your partner or someone close to you. You don't need them to say, this is what you should do. The same with kids, that when they calm, they can think more clearly, and then you can say, what have you thought about? Rather than, you need to go and tell your friend not to do that again. And so we really try and get parents to step back and to use empathy to step into children's shoes, to not be judgmental about children's emotions. And we use a technique called the emotion detective, where we ask people to think about similar adult equivalent situation to imagine your kid has been told off in front of all the rest of the class. Similar situation might be being at work and being told off in front of all your peers. And then you can kind of go, how would I feel? I feel so embarrassed, I feel so ashamed of myself. So you'd be able to connect with those feelings. We ask parents to try and connect with those feelings, how they would feel in an equivalent situation for them as an adult. And that allows them to start taking perspective. And that's really important, especially for those families or parents who are not very good at perspective taking or empathy. And there's many people who really struggle with that in relationships in general. So then we teach them, and this is what you might be able to say, some statements that actually go with that. I said, couldn't find me. I'm really upset. So also empathy needs to ideally be genuine, not just sad. It's more like, you connect with a feeling and then you communicate. Because it's authenticity as a parent is very important as well. We also work on building emotion vocabulary. helping children to put words to feelings as well. That's really important. So we use that, and that helps them to get a little distance from how they feel. I'm sad right now because of what happens at school with my teacher. I'm embarrassed. So words help thinking, helps processing the experience, and allows regulation to develop as well. We help parents to separate angry feelings from angry behaviour. We look at, for example, all anger is okay, but not all angry, and some angry behaviours are okay, like saying that you're angry, or stomping your feet, or jumping on a trampoline, or having a good yell when you're in the backyard. But not all behaviours are okay. So then we also look at what things are not okay and how to express anger. But you've got to have ways to express anger, to let off steam, to actually get the anger out as well. That's important. It's not just all anger needs to be not expressed. And we teach regulation skills, especially we teach children and parents how to build inner pause. When you're very emotional, you need to find ways of stopping, so breathing slowly. And ideally, we teach what we call bottom-up regulation strategies. Bottom-up regulation strategies don't use cognitive processes. And that is good because when parents or children are very emotional, you don't think clearly or actually general of their life. And so you need to use things that don't require you changing your thoughts. Instead, you might just walk away, stretch, breathe, move out into a different space, move your body around a little bit, count slowly, or there's other strategies as well. So those are really important regulation strategies for building in a pause, as well as letting off steam for calming strategies. And we also teach what to do after you've had big emotions, how to repair and redress things. So still taking responsibility, still doing something to actually say sorry or to address them, but only once the child is calm. Because if you make kids try and repair when they're angry or upset or distressed or not feeling heard, it doesn't teach them about how to resolve anger and their behaviour, the challenging behaviours. So when they're calm, we might ask those questions more open about what could you do to fix this? What could you do to about that broken toy, or what can we do next time? What can we do to make up for having extra time on the iPad today? And then support children to have infinite needs. So, and the last thing that we really do is we look at how to to change the way parents feel about emotions. Because if you don't like anger and you don't tolerate it, it's really hard to respond to anger in children when your kids have lots of anger. So we really try and look at this, and one of the things we know is that process of changing how people think and feel about emotions requires looking at family of origin experiences and unpacking that a little bit to think, what were the messages I learned growing up about emotions? And sorry. Yeah, what can I do to when I'm in that moment of my kid really emotional, what can I do to pause, slow down, take a break, rather than having those automatic reactions? We do a whole lot of work around that to examine that family of origin and then build parents' emotional awareness and vocabulary and teach them those bottom-up regulation strategies more than top-down, as well as to look at parents' own self-care. Because the more you look after yourself well, the more you're available for your children. So those are just some of the regulation strategies we might teach around slowing down and building in a pause to parents when they are in those moments of high intensity. So I'm just going to talk a little bit now about research evidence for our program. And as I said, we have really spent a lot of time collecting evidence to look at, does teaching these skills to parents, does working in this way have an effect? And so we've done many randomised controlled trials of our Tuning into Kids program, as well as our teens program, our toddlers program, our dads program, in different settings, trauma focused, with chronic illness, an online version, whole school approach. And we've looked at it in community as well as in settings. So these are some of our studies that we've done over the years and or been involved in, including the TINT brains, not TIK brains we're doing with Sarah and her team here, MNC. But a lot of them are also trials for the program being used in clinical settings or in different community settings. There's also a lot of evaluations now happening that are not with us. They're actually just happening in the real world because the program has been now disseminated a whole lot. We'll talk a bit more about that soon. But mostly our findings are that we do get, when parents learn these skills, they become less dismissive. So they really get that it makes sense why I focus on emotions. And we get some increases in empathy and emotion coaching, but that is the harder part. It's harder to do. So we always get stronger results for dismissiveness reductions, not for the emotion coaching going up as much. And we get improved parents being more better at emotional awareness and regulation for themselves. And on a whole range of different ways we've measured this, we've seen changes in children's emotional competence, emotional awareness, regulation, behaviour, anxiety, social functioning. Our toddlers trial we recently had published on, we actually had, when parents did the 6-session program, their toddlers at 12 months follow-up had lower stress cortisol measured using hair samples of the stress in the last month. So we do see the impacts on children with lower levels of stress when their parents are more emotionally responsive with them. And improvements in the family and arguably in the wider community around people raising children. And these are just a couple of the studies. So I'm not going to go into these, but we did start with big studies first with preschoolers. And we also have done studies comparing a behavioural parenting program with tuning into kids. And we actually find it has no difference in terms of behavioural outcomes. They both improve behaviour. So that's really important to look at, you know, and different mechanisms of change, but we can see that they're equivalent in terms of the effectiveness. There might be a whole lot of other things that you can't measure so easily, though. That's always of interest to us as well. And we've had a trial of our dad's program. I may not get a chance to talk about this, but that's now led. We've recently been successful in getting a Movember grant to disseminate the program. It's called Scaling What Works, so taking it out to about 800 dads around Australia through reaching the farmers who are harder to reach. So that's a really exciting new project we're just beginning right now. Gary McDonald and Nikki Boswell and our team are working on that currently. And as I said, the trial of the tuning to toddlers as well. So I think probably when you do this earlier in children's development, it has a quicker effect. You know, it's easier to change parents' way of parenting when kids are younger. The habits are not as well formed. It's harder with the teens. And Christiana's work has been very, really looking into how to do this with parents and teens. And that's been really good to do because you can still learn to parent differently at any stage of development. Even, we often have grandparents or great grandparents doing programs, and they find that they are changing the way they talk with their adult kids about emotions. So this is actually more of a relationship skill than just a parenting skill. And we've also looked at this in kids who have confidence trauma through the Australian Child Foundation and trial there. And it's also now being used in lots of other countries. So it's being used in various places. And this is one study that's happening in Iran. In the United States, they did a big trial of the teens program with adopted and kinship carers of 10 to 13-year-old young people. Mostly the parents were either incarcerated, drug and alcohol use, and so they were being cared for by someone else. Some were also adoptions that were, from overseas, but most of those were convicts families. And that was also really has really good outcomes with changing the carers when they responded. And lots of trials also happening within the community. That's been really fantastic to see. There's a greater emphasis now since we first began, which is just part of chambers these days, is that services have to evaluate what they do when they use an evidence-based program. So we've often supported organisations where they've done evaluations of our programs completely independently. For example, Headspace is one of the ones that Anne and Christiana were involved in, which has some really great results through Headspace there. But we've been particularly interested in, we developed the program as a group program. So you've got bunch of parents sitting around, and you know, and what is it about a group space that makes it work? And so more recently, we decided to really start looking at one-to-one delivery, and the TIK trial is happening. There's a number of people in the room here who are involved in delivery of one-to-one sessions with parents of a young person who's 10 to 13 with anxiety, mothers and daughters, pilot trial. And so, you know, for example, delivering one-to-one sessions an hour each week instead of coming to a group. Now, we've always thought that groups are really important here because it reduces defensiveness and it allows people to learn from each other, especially when they're not familiar or used to talking about emotions. It's often very helpful to have that exposure. Often for dads, it's one of the most powerful things they said, is that they found it very helpful to actually to be with a group of other dads learning about emotions and talking about emotions when no one had talked about emotions with them in their lives growing up. And it wasn't part of their culture around them. So we do want to know what works and how do people learn? How do people learn about parenting? You know, if they need help, where do they get that help? It's often the web or asking people around them. So we've been exploring this a bit recently in a trial that we've done over the past messy few years in COVID. So we did manage to get a parent and some teacher follow-up, but that was tricky through, you know, Department of Education putting freeze on evaluation. So we compared group and one-to-one because obviously services often want to deliver groups, but often because it's cost effective and often efficient. But at the same time, it's hard to set up a group. So then if you're doing it one-to-one, isn't effective there. So there are advantages to actually having the two different models of delivery. And as I said, it's also, I think, it's about trying to change a bit more of a culture of people talking about it. That's something that we're really interested in promoting through having people share in groups a bit more. But the research on one-to-one versus group says that while both are effective, there might be some slight advantages to one-to-one delivery. And those of you who've worked clinically in any way, you'll know that we can often really delve more into a family or a parent or a person who you're working with. You can delve more into the specifics of what's going on for them when you have them talking in a session. So that does have some benefits. So in this trial, we recruited parents of children 4 to 10 with challenging behaviours, and we pretty much included anyone who could speak English, but we had some exclusions around the severity. They had autism was too severe on the so if it was mild, it was okay. If they were currently unsafe, we would include. So we have a few exclusion criteria there. We ended up with 307 parent-child dyads, and they were then randomised into a group delivery for the program, a one-to-one delivery for the program, or an online version of the program, which I'll mention separately in the separate write-up. But that's 10 modules, 10 to 15 minutes of people just passively watching, learning some skills, having some exercises to do, and then trying out their kids at home. So it's not therapist-led or group facilitated led. It's actually just self-paced learning and control. So, and then we follow them up 6 months follow-up. So this is just a brief. We ended up with about 70 to 80 in each of our 4 groups. Group delivery of teenage kids, one-to-one delivery of teenage kids, online delivery of teenage kids, waitlist control. We've got the online version later. We were lucky to get as many as we did through COVID. This, we've all done creative things to ensure we can continue our research through these past few years, and we actually found that moving to delivery online was very effective. And when we compared those in a group or one-to-one online versus face-to-face, there were no differences in the results. So what we can see is that the space is working equally online or more face-to-face. And when it comes to parents and parenting and parent work, it's easier to get on your computer at home, and then it is often to come into a session at a clinic or something like that, which might be, a 50-minute session plus an hour travel either way, and who's looking after the kids. So it actually reduces quite a few of the barriers to and we have just measured with parent report and some teacher report, as I said, we started with observations, and then we didn't have quite enough money, and then we didn't quite have enough to do all the follow-ups. It was hugely expensive, so we have only got time 1 observation data, unfortunately. And our intervention, we use a structured manual for the group and a structured manual for the one-to-one delivery. If they were getting group, they would have 2 facilitators. There would be somewhere around sort of 6 to 8 parents per group. If they were getting one-to-one delivery, it was 8 one-hour sessions. So two different, I'm just looking here at the difference between the group and the one-to-one delivery. And, you know, it's really interesting. The one-to-one delivery does allow you to really unpack, explore in a deep way what people's issues are, and it gives you more flexibility if they can't make it. So there are benefits, definitely. And yet people often say that they learn so much more by hearing other people talking about their family of origin experiences with sadness, with guilt. And they actually, it's often where their big breakthroughs came, when they heard others' stories. So we do have that, you know, 2 different kind of ways of working that have benefits, pluses and minuses. Our main findings, though, have been that both interventions have been effective, the group and the one-to-one, in improving how parents respond to emotions, and in particular in reducing anxiety in the sample kids. And the one-to-one was also effective in improving child emotion regulation and behaviour. And we did find that the one-to-one delivery, it was and it was usually a master's level student, a psychology students doing the placement with us, and also some more experienced facilitators who were doing the one-to-one. That when they did that, I mean, it did allow very tailored delivery, and we did find that in that group there was greater reductions in specific behaviour. And I think, and I'm also sort of just aware of even the experience we have with the TIK Brains trial, is that when you do the one-to-one work, you can really identify what are the barriers for a parent to actually being able to sit with their child's anger, talk about their child's sadness. You can really look much more at the meta emotion, the family of origin experiences that are in play. So I think that's one of the benefits of what it allows when you do that one-to-one work. And yet has practicalities, you know, can you actually, because I think also group is a very effective way of working too. And maybe it's about, it depends on what parents want and like. Maybe that's also important to give them options. And we also did evaluate the online version of the program, and people got these 10 modules, and then they had 2 support calls, about half an hour each. How are you going with content? What's come up? What are you noticing about the skills? And then helping the parents to apply the emotional coaching skills to their child, and also troubleshooting any particular issues that are coming up there. So we found that the support calls and the modules were really important, and actually led to behaviour problem reduction. So if they had more modules, more engagement in support calls, they had a better outcome that way. But on the whole, we found that that even this light touch of an online version led to reductions in dismissiveness, increases in parents' empathy and emotional coaching, and reductions in children's behaviour problems and anxiety. So even a light touch, which I was kind of surprised about. I always thought we need to unpack it a bit more to really get people to talk it through. But people were making that, you know, some really good changes from this, even in an online self-paced delivery. It's great. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about dissemination now, because I want to, I'll talk a bit about one of the exciting new projects that we are doing, that we are now delivering the tuning into kids. We just won a government tender for delivering online programs to the state of Victoria of our tuning in online programs. So it includes the TIKL program, a version of the tuning into toddlers online, as well as some other infant programs that are focused on more attachment and relational connection with the younger child. This is a really exciting part of the Royal Commission that they wanted to improve parenting supports. So we've developed this step model of a top flight, which is tuning in online programs like all online. And then people come into a website and then they will actually input some information about themselves and they'll get tailored modules, resources, things that they will get. And then if they have higher needs or they're struggling, they'll get support calls. So, and then if they still need support, they will be referred into attending an online group. And if they still need support, then they'll go into CAMS or other services. So we're expecting to see about 60,000 parents and carers. It's the parents and carers of children 0 to 11, any kind of challenging behaviour. So this is a very exciting initiative coming out of state government. And so it's going to be really interesting to see whether the step version of these kind of attachment and emotion focused programs are effective. So there's a big group of us from different universities with the tech skills and how to deliver well technologically, and also help people refer them into services. So if, for example, you the issues are primarily conflict in your relationship, that would be identified and be referred into Relationships Australia for help. So we take people into the right services. So it's also a referral process as well. These are some of the different programs that will be included there. But in terms of dissemination, we have trained over 10,000 people in using our programs around the world. The online training has been fantastic for us, and we just really increased the number of people we're training. Because people just log into a training, very interactive, very experiential for the professional to learn the program, then get the manual, and then take it out to work with their clients. I've also been involved in setting up Tuning Kids Europe, a company in Norway that's working with disseminating the program in Europe as well. And that's been going for about 3 years now, and it's now really starting to grow as well. So it's really interesting though, because you cannot take programs out easily to other countries without having a base in those places. That's also really interesting. I'm a psychologist, an academic, have no skills in this, but if you actually want to take a program out, you want to get reach, you actually got to have a business model. And that's one of the very interesting challenges that we faced with our program. But the program has been used really widely. So I think lots of different services. It's using clinical services, right through to community services, kindergarten, schools, the whole range, different sorts of services where people are offering and running our programs nowadays. And as I said, this is the lovely evaluating the November version of our program too. I won't talk about that anymore.
Great. And you're about all of that. Well, congratulations.
No. Maybe wait.
Any questions in the room or online?
Thanks for the time. I guess I want my question. I just wanted to ask for assessing the intervention effect in children or, the parents' side. I just wanted to ask, what was your contribution to assess the intervention effect?
We've done a number of things. I mean, usually we have done, sometimes treatment as usual, sometimes it's a waitlist control, which is tricky because then 12 months later your waitlist is then gets the intervention. But usually it's and in that we'll always control for other forms of intervention that people might have got in that time. When you're working with clinical samples, usually there's some kind of treatment as usual, so you are often comparing that.
Yeah, and how did you manage this different variable? Because then you wanted to define something for parents, so there are lots of different things, like something like that, the social context that was education of parents, the neighborhood, how did you?
We've always just controlled for those variables. They do not impact our outcomes. People learn these skills regardless of education or SES or anything like that. So we often, we usually don't end up controlling for education. Sometimes it's usually something else like how dismissive they were at baseline is the main control. But we always do measure those things and then include them in our hospital model analyses or whatever analyses you're doing. Yeah.
Thanks. It's really important work that you're doing. I think it's great. One of the things that strikes me is that you've talked a lot about behaviours that are very demonstrative, expressive,
Mhm.
anger and frustration. What about the kids that come with trauma? And
The kids who come with trauma.
yeah, and what sort of challenges do you see there? And is it a similar approach? Is it different? I saw the image of the traumatized child, and that's demonstrate that sort of.
Yes, look, and I think this is a good question because the approach is the same. If a child internalizes emotion more and holds it more in, you still have to do the same process of noticing it, connecting at the right times, using empathy, going slowly. You name emotions, the same process, and then you also often teach them how to regulate those feelings: stress, worry, sadness.
Is it more difficult to connect with those? Some of them, if they're.
No, I don't think so. It's usually, we work often with kids with behaviour problems, but equally with anxious kids or internalising kids or kids with illnesses, those other problems. I think the thing is that depends on your personality, your temperament, as to whether you hold emotions in more or more expressive, as well as culture. And so a parent will usually have to find, how do I talk to this child about emotions? I know that when they're in the emotion, I can't talk very much. So then I would come back later when we're driving the car, there's no eye contact, and that kid is maybe a bit more of a holder inner, but you might then sort of say, time right now, aren't you? To start with the point of empathy, give them space. You might be out walking and moving and then they talk. So finding that, how does this child best communicate? But it's the same skills. And I think, we recruited that last big trial with children with challenging behaviours. Many of them were kids who internalised stress, held it all in. And that's why we also saw reductions in anxiety as well as reductions in behaviour problems, because you get a bit of a mix of it, the kids are not always just pure externalising or pure internalisers either.
Thanks so much, Sophie. That was really terrific. Just a general one, like you often hear people say that the kids are growing up faster these days, access to information, technology, etc. How do you see that? How have you seen that sort of develop, if at all, over the past 20 years since starting this? And
Huge, yeah. When we like 10 years ago, we were trying to put together guidelines around screen use, and now it's just like, well, every child is online schooling and is immersed in that world. I think it's harder to process emotions because you don't always have as much face to face, and so kids aren't always learning those same skills so well. There's a lot of information they get earlier, and they're not always ready for that. The social skills, the dealing with emotions in relationships, still, it happens online, but it also still has to happen face to face to learn to read that other person. Otherwise, you have more difficulties. I would guess that children probably have more difficulties with emotions than they were 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. And I think it's become more complex, that space. But the skills are still the same, in terms of how you respond to that. People often say, well, all my emotion coaching happens by text message with my team. That's just a new space, isn't it? And that doesn't mean it's not effective. It's still effective. It's still connecting. It's still noticing what you just saw when they went through to their bedroom. But that change. Yeah. Are there any questions online?
No.
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm curious about the way you might adapt it with different cultural groups and taking it overseas.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering
The adaptation for I've just a whole lot of people just published a paper on this of the cultural adaptation for Iran, Turkey, Germany, Hong Kong. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yep. And look, each culture needs to adapt the way that they might use these skills, but we're getting cultural groups saying this is actually still what our kids need help with. Like in Hong Kong, its kids are suppressing and holding much more in. Huge difficulties with anxiety and depression. So they're needing to find a way of connecting around their emotional experience. So then it might be, when you talk about anger, you don't teach parents there to say, express your anger, because that's clearly not going to work. That's not what people are after. It might just be saying, I've got to find a way of still naming my anger and finding a way of actually saying it or addressing it, but it might not be to the older person in the room. So there are differences like that. In the Turkey trial, for example, people were often saying, I'm learning these skills, but my parents, the next generation, are saying, what are you modeling these kids for? What are you talking about the different emotions for? So quite critical when they are taking a different approach. And that's, I think, part of a cultural change, that will shift. And the feedback in Turkey has been, they are at a time when there is a shift. There's a change in being more emotion focused, social emotion focused in schools, although there's still a lot of traditional ideas which are very much in conflict. So they've got to find that balance between how a parent could actually be talking to their child about emotions, but not in front of the community, because that might be criticised quite heavily. Like we've just a response from a review I've had just today is around, how do you know this would work in a Norwegian culture? They're so different. It's like, yes, that's true. They are Holderinists. They don't express a lot of emotion. So, but they still find that in fact what they're doing here is starting to be able to put words, name it, talk about it in relationships, and that's a cultural change there. So each culture seems to adapt it to fit the core principles into a culturally kind of matched fit. And I think that only happens with people taking it and working it into those cultures. Because equally people are having problems with kids' emotional and behavioural, social development, and all over the place, and they're needing ways of not just about using behavioural strategies for kids, which isn't always working for many parents. Any final questions?
It's really lovely to see you
And
person.
all online, so
And I had a question. I know there's lots of co-design studies now with like machine learning treatments and the competition about co-designing different parenting programs. And I was just thinking, how has any tips for program being developed out specific to parents and specific children in the past to really make it.
yes, so using a co-design, how to, and I guess we've been doing this for 20 or so years now, so there's a lot of refinement that's come from parents' feedback over time in lots of contexts. It might be working in an Indigenous community that they don't like it this way, and we get that feedback and go, okay, we need to adapt this piece. So there's always a lot of that kind of input feedback. With our tuning and online programs, our top project, the new one, state government funded fund, it's completely co-designed from the beginning. So we started with having people input on every kind of message that we give about parenting, so that it actually meets a whole range of parents, in terms of education, diversity, whatever. And that's really interesting because in the New Zealand camps, they just have been doing some co-design work with the Tuning to Teens program. And they found that the main thing that parents and adolescents said that they wanted different was parents said, I want to connect more with my adolescent. That's the key goal for me. And adolescents said, I want to be listened to. That was the key goal for them, not building emotional intelligence or emotional competence or learning to parent. That's what people want. So it's really useful to get that input and go, can we shift and adapt that? So that's a good point. I think we're at a good stage where we're doing much more work around parent advisory groups as well, and now Parent and Family Research Alliance. We're trying to look more at getting that input into co-designing and being a very iterative process.
Can that be just one? Michelle, thank you so much again for being.
Thank you, and thank you for those.